There's no one out there, I told myself. It's just an animal. The gravel crunched under my tires as I turned onto the narrow forest road, trees crowding the path like an unwelcoming audience. The air was crisp, the late afternoon sun slicing through the canopy in golden streaks. I was heading to a camping spot I'd been to before, a serene clearing by the lake, perfect for solitude and escaping the grind of city life. The first 2 days were bliss. I set up camp, fished by the water, and read by the fire as the sun dipped below the horizon. The woods were alive but peaceful. Birds chirped, the wind rustled the leaves, and the occasional deer would dart between the trees. I felt at ease, as if I'd left all the weight of modern life behind. But then came the third night. I'd fallen asleep to the sound of crickets, their rhythmic hum lulling me into a deep slumber. Sometime around midnight, I woke abruptly, my heart pounding. My mind was groggy, struggling to catch up, but then I realized why I'd woken. A faint, distant cry, like that of a baby, had pierced my dream. As I blinked into the darkness, straining to hear, the sound was gone, replaced by an unsettling, heavy silence. The oppressive quiet pressed in, and after a few minutes I convinced myself it must have been my mind playing tricks on me. Uneasy but unwilling to dwell on it, I lay back down and eventually drifted off again. The next day I shook it off. Maybe I'd imagined it. I spent the day hiking, collecting firewood, and enjoying the warmth of the sun. But as the light faded and the shadows grew long, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woods, once inviting, felt oppressive, as if the trees leaned in closer, their branches reaching for me. That night, the crying returned. Louder this time. It echoed through the forest, a heart-wrenching wail that sent shivers down my spine. I sat up in my sleeping bag, clutching my flashlight, its weak beam illuminating the tent walls. The sound was closer, more distinct. It didn't sound like a bird anymore. It sounded like a child in pain. My rational mind fought against my rising terror. There's no one out there, I told myself. It's just an animal. I didn't dare leave the tent, instead forcing myself to lie back down. Sleep didn't come easily. On the fifth night, everything fell apart. I was startled awake not by crying, but by a guttural, rasping sound. Something heavy was circling my tent, its footsteps crunching against the dry leaves. My heart hammered in my chest as I gripped the flashlight and knife I kept by my side. The sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a low growl that sent ice through my veins. Then, the crying returned, shrill and agonized, coming from just outside the thin fabric of the tent. Summoning courage I didn't know I had, I unzipped the tent slightly and shone my flashlight into the night. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. But the crying didn't stop. It seemed to surround me, coming from every direction at once. I zipped the tent back up, trembling, and sat with my knife clutched tightly, waiting for dawn. It was just before sunrise when I finally saw it. My exhaustion had lulled me into a dazed stupor when I heard a new sound, the crackling of twigs. I looked up to see a figure standing just beyond the dying embers of my campfire. My blood turned to ice. It was a man, or what used to be one. He was naked, his pale, filthy skin stretched tight over bones that jutted out at unnatural angles. His head twitched violently, his teeth grinding with a sickening rhythmic sound. His eyes rolled back in his head, showing only white, and his mouth hung open as a rasping, animalistic growl escaped his throat. He stepped closer, his movements jerky and erratic, as if something unseen pulled at his limbs. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Then his head snapped toward me, and I saw his face fully. His mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, and he lunged forward. That was enough to break my paralysis. I bolted from the tent, leaving everything behind. My boots barely touched the ground as I sprinted to my vehicle, the sound of his growling and grinding teeth following close behind. I didn't dare look back. My hands fumbled with the keys, but adrenaline gave me speed. I yanked the door open, slammed it shut, and locked it just as his pale, bony fingers slammed against the glass, leaving streaks of grime. I gunned the engine and tore down the narrow road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I saw him standing in the middle of the road, his body twisted at an impossible angle, watching me as I fled. The growling faded into the night, but the sound of his teeth grinding still haunts me. I never went back for my gear. Some things are better left behind.